Abe, do you remember who went first last time? Because for the life of me, I can't remember. Oh, hey everyone. I'm Dustin Bass with the Sons of History. Now, every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central Time, I do a show on Instagram Live. Now, I'd love it if you'd join me on Instagram on Thursday nights, but until then, you can watch all of the previously recorded episodes here on YouTube. So, while you're enjoying this conversation, I'm going to be enjoying a little game of chess with my good friend Thomas Jefferson. And don't worry, Abraham Lincoln is here just to keep us honest. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the show. All right, what's up, everyone? Hope you're doing all right. This should be a pretty interesting conversation. Going to have Morgan Zegers with us tonight. She is the founder of Young Americans. What's up, Charlie? Young Americans Against Socialism. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation. We did have her on the show, our podcast, our weekly podcast. We had her on the show, I want to say like 2 or 3 months ago. Very thorough conversation. So if you don't listen to our podcast, you can go check that out. And without further ado, let's bring on Morgan. All right, here we go. And 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey,
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you. It's good to
Yeah,
see
you
you.
too. I hope my connection is good. I never really know how it's going to be. I'm from upstate New York, so it's kind of a hit or miss in the rural areas up here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's nice to see you.
I was anticipating the same thing. I thought about that because I was thinking you're from upstate New York. So who knows how the Wi-Fi is going to turn out for you.
It's been a little difficult
Yeah,
with
I bet.
COVID.
But hey, we're going to power through. So how are you doing?
I'm good. I mean, I'm pretty excited because seeing all these state by state regulations for travel, it's been a little difficult for the team because our whole shtick is to interview people who have lived through socialism and communism at Young Americans Against Socialism, our nonprofit. And we were kind of planning of, maybe by the end of summer, we'll be able to at least start planning out more interviews because we really want to get a lot of educational content out. By the end of 2020, it's a really important time for our country. We want people to be educated, especially going into an election season where we want people to have a good sense of principles and values. But just with everything that's going on, especially in New York and Florida and all these new restrictions, we're setting up a completely new way to produce the testimony videos without having to do that travel. So we're pretty excited, and it's just like a new phase for us, and we're kind of buckling down. And either way, we have to get the content. We're going to just work with what we've got. So we're pretty excited. I'm sure you can kind of agree with that it's just kind of getting creative with what we can do.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you work with what you've got. So I'm out here in Texas. You're out there in New York, polar opposites, more or less, on the political spectrum. We flip out whenever our governor, Greg Abbott, even mentions, even slightly hints at a lockdown. What is it like over there in New York?
Uh, that's what's so funny is I just did not realize that people were experiencing something other than just perpetual lockdown. Like we opened very slowly, and now I think just today he announced that you can't have bars open unless they serve food. And so my favorite thing is that upstate bars are now like selling chips, and they're calling them Cuomo chips and charging $1 just to be like, hey, we're selling food. If you want to give us these stupid regulations, then we'll play your game,
Exactly.
play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And so I just think people in upstate New York have always been frustrated with Cuomo. I actually, in the beginning of COVID-19, I was like, I appreciate that he's not pulling the political mess that de Blasio was in terms of blaming Trump right away, and he was actually really surprising me. But now it's getting pretty bad, and he posted that poster for sale. I don't know if you saw that, and it was just this
It was
awkward,
beautiful to me. Yeah.
uncomfortable, cringeworthy victory lap that was
Yeah.
very, very undeserving. He does not deserve a victory lap in any way. So we're experiencing a lot of frustration, I guess you could say, not only in upstate but in downstate especially.
Yeah, I did see the poster. I have it
It's
ordered.
something.
It's being shipped, and I've got a place on my wall just for it. And I got another one so I can have it on my right above my bed. So yeah, I can look at that before I go to sleep. So All right, let's get down to the
I'm gonna put my
brass
glasses
tacks.
on. Don't judge.
There
I'm
you go.
kind of
No, you
blind.
look.
It's late. It's
You
kind of
look
fuzzy.
brilliant with or without the glasses on. So do what you've got to do.
I'm an early riser. I don't know about you, but I'm an early riser, and so
Oh,
like by 9 o'clock, I'm like ready to go to bed. So
okay.
this is pretty rebellious for me to be doing an Instagram live. So hello, everybody.
There you go. I'm on the opposite end. Like I can stay up till God knows when, and that's usually when I start doing like a lot of my thinking and reading and writing and everything. So,
I love
um,
it.
So I want to hit on what exactly it is that you do. You are spreading the message that hey, socialism is not the way to go, and we've got a couple of centuries at least to tell us this is not a good idea. But on that note, and I don't know if you've seen this poll. It came out towards the end of last year, the Gallup poll,
Oh yeah.
and it's just trend and positive views compared to capitalism and socialism. I want to run some numbers by you and get your thoughts on it. For capitalism, in 2010, millennials were favored it by about 66%, and now it's at 51%. So there's been a 15% drop in
Okay.
favorability towards capitalism. Socialism, however, hasn't really moved over that time period. It was at 46% and now at 49%. But I think this is what is interesting is that there's an obvious, maybe educational disconnect. And I want to hit on that in a little bit because you and I think we're pretty in tune on what in God's name is going on in the education system. But Gen Xers and baby boomers are sort of neck and neck. So with capitalism, it was at 58% and it's now at 61% favorability. And with socialism, 31 to 39. That's an increase of 8%. But baby boomers, 58%, and now it's up to 68% favored to capitalism, and then 31% and 32%. It's like it's been pretty streamlined. Streamline a third approval of socialism with baby boomers, and streamline pretty much half of millennials. Why do you think that there's that 20% differentiation between the two?
Well, I think you could take a lot of lessons from the data. One of the most obvious things is that the older generations, they tend to favor capitalism. They tend to understand the threat of socialism. And I would say, like many people in older generations, when they talk to me, they say it's because your generation hasn't felt that direct threat of socialism. And so, with that, I say what the answer is telling the firsthand testimony of people who have lived through it. And so that's kind of why I wanted to start Yes. But on top of that, something that's really interesting, and I hope that we can see the data from maybe from a year from now and see how it's changed after experiencing the threat of COVID-19 and the Chinese Communist Party and the threat that they have now posed to the world. This is really the first time that young Americans have felt the direct threat of a socialist or communist government. It may not be our government, but instead it's a government that's not even in our own country, and our loved ones have passed away. Our family, small businesses are suffering. Millennials are older now, and so they have businesses that are actually suffering from the shutdown. On top of that, you have high schoolers whose proms and graduations were canceled, their last sports seasons, their senior year. Same thing with college students. They're paying this ungodly amount of money to go to a campus or to not go to a campus and to get a degree. So,
Yeah.
this is really the first time where we're experiencing the unfairness of an oppressive and lying government. China knew that COVID-19 would spread from person to person, and they kept it hidden. And so I hope that this opens their eyes to the fact that, wait a second, what is causing this? And it's because socialist and communist governments lie to protect their image, they oppress people, and they suppress the truth. And so I hope that this is going to be a real eye opener for us in the long term.
Yeah, I hope so too. I want to I want to throw something at you. So I'm always in conversation. I've got a lot of friends on the left and I got a lot of friends on the right. And I try to be somewhat in the middle, but I fell probably. But I've had conversations with both sides, and both sides say the same verbiage of people are coming awake. They are awakening
Yeah.
and their eyes are being opened. And when I talk to some of my friends, I'm like, on one side of the aisle. I'm like, yeah, exactly. And then I talked to somebody else on the other side of the aisle, and they're like, we're coming awake. I mean, things. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, that's not even happening. Like, you're waking up to things that are propaganda that you're believing, and yet that aren't true, right?
Useful idiots is what I would say.
Do what?
They're like the useful idiots of our time.
Yeah. I was telling a friend of mine that the other night. He got out of college not too long ago, and I was like, yeah, they're useful idiots. And I don't think he'd ever heard that phrase before. And he's like, yeah, that's it.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, young Americans, they probably haven't even heard the term useful idiots before, and it's a common term used by Lenin. I mean, I think he's the one who coined it. But playing off of that, it's interesting. When I do these testimonies and when we prepare to film, I have the conversations with the people that came from the countries. And I was talking to a girl today. We're preparing her video. We're probably going to post it in September around then. She's from Nicaragua. And she was in that group of student protesters and freedom fighters around 2018 who fought back against the Sandinistas and the socialist uprising in Nicaragua. And there's a whole history behind that. And again, you don't learn about that in American history classes. But she says she's just disturbed by it because in Nicaragua, when they were fighting back against the government, they had to seek shelter. And what they did is they found shelter and were given that protection at universities. The universities stood up against the government and allowed the student protesters to stay in safety, or else they would have been taken as political prisoners to jail. And so they would cover their face with masks to protect their identity, or else their families were going to be killed by the socialist government, the dictatorship. They would cover their faces, and they would have these zones, not autonomous zones, but it's crazy to think that now you have these autonomous zones with Antifa, and they're masked, and they think that they're fighting for something that's worthy and moral and for a greater society. And my friend who was telling me from Nicaragua, she said, I am just embarrassed for them, and it's hard for me to see that because they think they're advocating for something so wonderful. They think that they're on the same level as the Hong Kong freedom fighters. They think they're on the same level as the student protesters from people from countries like Nicaragua. And really, they're fighting for the same oppressive ideas that got all the previous protesters in that situation. And she said it was just disturbing to have to see that. And so that's the kind of emotion and that's the kind of testimony that we hope to keep grabbing, because it was really powerful to hear her talk about it. She said even just seeing them in masks and seeing what they're calling for at the same time, she said it was just disturbing for her to watch.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up that comparison that's made, because I remember back in it was during the Occupy Wall Street movement, and the leader of the Occupy Wall Street movement made a direct comparison between them and those conducting the Arab Spring. And I was like, and I wrote about it, and this is, a long time ago, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, but I was like, that is incredibly, one, naive, but also disrespectful to the ones who actually worked and conducted the Arab Spring movement, because they were actually fighting against absolute dictatorship. And so I think that there's a lot of that where it's like you're not all on the same playing field. There are things to work toward. There are things that you need to focus on and be like, okay, this isn't right, so this needs to change. And I've talked about that in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and I said, look, it's on both sides. Like, things need to change, things need to take place, things need to happen. And I've had people say, you got to tear down the whole system. And I'm like, what? You don't do that. You don't tear down you don't burn it all down to the ground and then make it in your own image. That's what the Russians did. That's what the French did. That's what the Spanish did, and now you have China as well. So you don't do that. I want to throw you a little bit of a curveball though on this Gallup poll, because I think that somebody mentioned in the comments a second ago, it's like because young people are uninformed, and I think that is a very accurate statement. There's not a lot of education on both ends. I think you and I've had that conversation. Yeah. There needs to be education on the evils of both sides. But this sort of struck me. Free enterprise system, the same Gallup poll, free enterprise system versus big business. In millennials, 2010 favored free enterprise system 89%. It's now at 83%, still pretty good. Big business 55 to 46. Gen Xers 86 to 88 for free enterprise, 54 to 55, pretty much streamlined for big business, and baby boomers 83 to 91 for free enterprise, and 40 to 55 for big business. So there's a 15% increase, interestingly enough. But it's very interesting to me that millennials obviously favor highly the free enterprise system, and yet 50% of them favor socialism. And those two don't mix. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think your question kind of answers itself. And that's something that I'm always advocating for. And I love the book, The Art of War, and it's a classic. I mean, I read it and I really related to it in the fight against socialism because it talks about defining who your enemy is. And I always say our enemy in the the grand fight against socialism, the generational fight against socialism, it is not the young Americans, the millennials and Gen Z who think that they want socialism, who think that if they support Bernie Sanders and AOC, they're going to end up like Denmark. That's not the case. They're just very confused. They're being lied to, and they love capitalism. They thrive in capitalism. We need to message to them that those values are actually very American, that they do have. But the good thing is, it's very positive. Like, that's why I'm very optimistic. Not 70% of young Americans say they'd vote for a socialist. 70% of young Americans do not want to seize the means of production. They do not want to get rid of capitalism in the sense of actually getting rid of private business and private industry. And what's going on right now is the left is really good at distorting what definitions are, distorting basic language, rejecting basic history and economics. And so now you have two generations of young Americans who think if we support socialism and get rid of capitalism, we'll end up like Denmark. Denmark is capitalist. And so it's really hard for us to talk about this because then when we say, if you implement the socialism that these guys are talking about, you'll end up like Venezuela. They immediately go, oh, no. The left told me that the answer to that is U.S. sanctions. Venezuela, it's not socialism, it's U.S. sanctions. They have these knee-jerk reactions that they've basically been trained to answer with. And I went to the University of Illinois Chicago one time, and I didn't want to make some like video making fun of them or anything. And instead, I just wanted to get their reactions on camera to show people, to show stakeholders, to get them to see why I started Yes. And I asked everybody on the campus, I was like, hey, would you support socialism or capitalism for the future of America? And they all of them, oh, obviously socialism, 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 socialism. Oh, not capitalism. I don't really know a socialist country, but I know I definitely don't want to live in a capitalist one. All of it was knee jerk. And that made me so happy because it just shows they have no idea what socialism is. They have no idea what capitalism is. And it makes me really optimistic because, yes, we have a lot of catching up to do. But the good news is that there's a small group of radical people that want to seize the means of production, want to implement socialism and communism. They're the ones rioting and in the black masks, carrying around hammer and sickle signs. And what we have to do is reach the young Americans who are innocent, who are well intentioned, and who are unfortunately ignorant on the issues and could be used as useful idiots. And we have to do that before it's too late. So that's kind of the focus on this. Stop making fun of young Americans for not understanding what socialism is. They're being lied to. They weren't properly educated on it, and they have a sense of feeling more moral by supporting this great utopian policy of socialism. So that's why we can't force them into the loving arms of people like Bernie Sanders and AOC. We have to show them that we care about the issues they care about, and our solutions combined with a capitalist economy are the best way to solve that. You know what I mean?
I think I do. Yeah.
But
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Which
thank you.
moves me into my next question, which is about free speech. That has come under heavy attack here lately. But like you said, we just have to do our due diligence of informing, of educating, and saying, look, understand both. Look, at the end of the day, and this is how I feel. At the end of the day, if you want to remain a socialist or a communist or whatever, as long as you know both, as long as you know what it is, the history of both, the definition of both, then I'm fine you choosing your way. That's the American way. That's what you get to do. Freedom of speech, however, has been under attack here lately, especially with the social media has the big guys, Facebook, YouTube, all these people are really suppressing just people's opinions. And it's not just happening there; it's happening in big places, i.e., the New York Times. We all heard about Mary Weiss, who she's like, I've had it. I've had enough. Because not only is it hard out there just to get on social media and post something without getting ravaged by people who just come at you, but it's another thing to have that in the workplace when you work in the industry of you are supposed to be telling the truth. You're supposed to be doing this. And so Barry Weiss, if you haven't read it, ladies and gentlemen, read her resignation letter. You can just Google or DuckDuckGo, search her resignation letter. It's really powerful, really good. But she said something in there that really stood out to me. She said, Twitter is not the masthead of the New York Times, but Twitter has become its ultimate editor. And like, how do you address that with letting people know free speech is an American ideal, and now it's perpetuated throughout the world, and now it's being suppressed back. You can look in the major Western civilization parts of the world, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. They're making laws against free speech because they're saying hate speech, which we'll get to in a second. But what do you say to people when you're talking about the need for free speech?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting for me, and I try and bring a unique perspective to this of just coming off of a college campus. I graduated in 2018 from American University, and that was a whole experience in its own because it was the number one most politically active campus in the country. That does not mean, however, that we had vigorous debate or anything of that sort. It was 90% liberal, and it was a very hostile situation. I mean, I went to a Milo Yiannopoulos event. I don't know if you remember him, but he was really controversial, and he said some terrible stuff. I mean, he said like women and college the education system were co-conspiring to make tests easier for women so that men fail, and that's the only reason women are doing better in college. Just some weird stuff. And as a freshman, I was like, is this guy really going to say this in person, like in front of a crowd? Because I was watching it on YouTube, and I went to it, and so I went to the event, and I sat in the crowd, and he he said the same dumb stuff, and I was like, wow. And I loved it because it was my first time of being like, this guy is a total jerk, and he just said all this stuff out loud, and it was fascinating to watch. But of course, after I left, this like huddle of 20 people from this group called the Darkening on campus, which was the Black Lives Matter arm on campus, they swarmed around me, and I was like a little freshman walking to my dorm. I was really scary, and at night I was leaving this event, and they said, we just saw you walk out of that event. Were you in there? We bet you voted for Trump. Blah 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 blah. And at the time, I'll admit, it was like March 2016. I voted for John Kasich in the primaries, and I was like, no, no, I swear I voted for Kasich. Please don't be mad at me. Now I voted for Trump, and I would defend myself, but it was just so scary. And the problem we're seeing right now is that I think older Americans would see what was going on campuses and be like, "Oh, they're going to grow up, and once they get to the real world, they're going to realize they have to grow up, and they can't act like that. They can't act like temper tantrum children and toddlers. They have to grow up." It never happened. They brought their culture from college campuses to the workplace. And I think that same thing is happening like with the press goggle that you see at the White House. I think they act so immature. They ask ridiculous questions. And it's just another example of people acting the way they did in college and carrying it into the workplace. And when you have something like with the New York Times with that amazing letter that she wrote, I think it was awesome, but it makes me worried because she's very much a centrist, and she got the boot just the way everybody else does who disagrees with the mob. When you bow down to the mob, you're going to experience some backlash. And what I say is, I don't know, you can't back down. You can't give in to the mob because they're just going to come after you anyways. And I think of the Bolsheviks from Russia, from the USSR. They got rid of not only the people who opposed them, but the people that didn't support them enough. You know what I mean? And so that's really the direction that we're heading in. And when I saw that from the New York Times, that's what I thought of, that they're not just going to go after the hardcore conservatives, the Trump supporters, the people who are actively vocal against them. They're going to start going after the Barry Weisses out there. Am I pronouncing her name right? They're going to start going after people like her who just aren't on their side with enough passion. That's what socialists and Marxists love to do.
Yeah, I mean, and it's intimidation, like you were talking about on your university campus, and it's on social media as well. It's in the workplace, and I hope that there are going to be more people like Barry Weiss who actually say, "Hey, enough with this. Like this is getting completely out of hand." And I think it wakes more people up to the point where, like, yeah, I mean, even if I disagree with the person, I shouldn't feel nervous about putting my comment out there. I ran into that not too long ago, just with a Black Lives Matter post that I wrote on my personal account regarding, I wonder how many of my friends know that the founders of the organization are Marxists. And there were a lot of people who liked it, but then there was like an onslaught of insults and you don't know what you're talking about, and you know but it was a lot of misinformation as well, to the extent where it's like you need to know what it is you're talking about before you actually talk about it, because you need to understand that there are people who are going to call you on the carpet about it, and you need to know what they're talking about and whether that's true or not, so you can call them on the carpet back.
Yeah.
And so I think, to an extent, something as big as the New York Times, I think having big name people like Barry Weiss and recently James Bennett, who was the opinion editor, he was considered, I think most people thought he was in a couple of years going to take over as the editor in chief of the New York Times. And he stepped down. He said he quit after the Tom Cotton opinion piece came out, because it was another just we can't even speak. We can't even have opposing opinions now. And yes, it's exactly right. It's like it has to be this one lane that you stay in, and not just go at your own pace, but you have to go at the pace of everyone else, and that's where it's really dangerous.
Yeah, and coming from that college experience, what baffled me is I talk about this in my speeches, and you and I have kind of talked about this. I had a college roommate who was a communist, and she had a poster of Mao Zedong, Lenin, Stalin, and Karl Marx on her bedroom wall, mass murderers and dictators, and I was treated with more vitriol than she was just for being a conservative and a Republican, and that really freaked me out because these people are very nice and they're very kind, and then as soon as you find out that somebody's a Republican, it's just like, nope, they're canceled. And I think back to, I had a conversation with my professor and I opened up to him, I think a political research professor. I opened up to him that I was Republican. And then the next day, when we had classes, we had a lesson on stereotypes and assumptions. And one of the assumptions was, okay, class, we're going to talk about what are some basic assumptions that can be made for why people in the South vote Republican. And I was like, oh gosh, here we go. And I'm sitting in the class, and it's not a big class. It's not like the whole world's looking in on you if you speak up in that classroom. Like 30 people at most. And it's very intimate and awkward. And so he asked the question, and everybody, like all the woke people, were like, oh yeah, here we go. But they were also kind of nervous to answer because they wanted to say something kind of harsh, but are you really going to say it? And so everybody's kind of like half raising their hand. He picks the first person. They go, well, the South is by the border and they don't like immigrants down there, so they vote Republican. And he just looks at her and he goes, yes. What's the second reason? Because there's only two, right? And so I'm like, oh, what's the second reason? Let's
She
find out.
nailed it. She nailed
I'm
it on
like,
the
let's
first
hear it.
try.
And so then
Congratulations.
the next person goes, and he's like, yes. And the person goes, race. And my professor goes, yes, and moves on to talk about why that was correct. And I tell that story, and what's weird is now I speak on college campuses, and I don't feel bad, but I just admit people are like, what do you do when you face awkward situations in the classroom? How do I speak up? And I would tell them, listen, I didn't have the confidence to speak up in the classroom in the beginning because it was really scary. I didn't feel smart enough on the issues. I was a little nervous, and I just didn't. And one of the times I just kind of like walked out in a situation, that situation when he did say that Republicans were the way we are because we don't like immigrants and we're racist, that was really uncomfortable for me. I didn't make a stink of it. I just, I got my binder and I walked out because I was like, wow, that was crazy. And now what I say to them is if you aren't ready to speak up, and that's totally fine because it's a really harsh environment for you to do so, it's understandable. Just open your laptop or start recording on your phone and get that footage so that people who aren't in that classroom can start to see and start to understand what goes on in the American classroom, both in high school and middle school and in college. If you don't have the courage to speak up yet and you want people to know about it, though, start recording because it could get on Fox News if it's good enough. And that can spread across the country. We need to help people who aren't in the classroom with us understand just how bad the indoctrination and the hateful rhetoric can really be. And so I just say, open that camera and start recording, and that should help you out.
Yeah. I referenced places like Australia and the UK earlier. They've made laws about hate speech and different things like that. What is your argument to people whenever they say all speech is protected except hate speech?
Yeah, well, with everything that they do, the definition is open. And so it really freaks me out because what is hate speech to them? And they think some of the most basic things that used to be okay to say a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, think of what people used to say 10 years ago and the jokes that were made on TV. That's unacceptable these days. And so the barrier is always changing. The Overton window is always shifting because of the left. And what worries me is, I don't know if you saw this, earlier this year, there was an announcement that now people, I think it was in Great Britain or just with like their national healthcare system, if one of the staffers or one of the workers in the healthcare system felt like they were being treated in a hateful way, or if somebody was wearing a shirt that seemed hateful, or if somebody was wearing a shirt that was misogynistic or racist, then they could refuse them service if they felt they were being mistreated by the speech of the patient. And so that worries me because you say something like, I voted for Donald Trump, and they might say, you're saying something is racist, you are misogynist, and I'm not going to serve you anymore. And so that's when you just start to get this really, really dangerous pattern. And so to know that when you give government that kind of power over your healthcare, when you give government that kind of power over your life, that's when you get into a sticky situation of what even is hate speech. If you can offend anybody with any kind of statement and then they have control over saving your life one day, it's very concerning. And going back to that conversation that I had with that woman from Nicaragua, she was telling me that the same thing would happen when protesters were shot at with AK-47s from the Sandinistas, from the dictatorship, and their paramilitary groups. If they went to the hospital, they would be refused service because it was clear that they were protesters against the government, and so they would be refused service for their political views. And in the end, the universities actually set up sort of like an ER for the people who were protesting to get some sort of healthcare treatment, because they knew if they were sent to the hospitals because of political reasons, they would be denied service and they would not make it.
It's bizarre world. So if I don't know if everybody who's watching has seen this moment, I'm sure you have the Jordan Peterson, Kathy Newman interview that happened, I think, 2.5 years ago on Channel 4 in Britain, in London, where she was asking him, how is it that his right to be offensive trumps somebody's right not to be offended? And he responded with, well, in order to think, you have to risk being offensive or offended. And so she's like, yeah, but, and he's like, well, I mean, you have, or obviously have no problem, offending me in order to get to the bottom of what I'm thinking and how I think. And he's like, so, and that's fine. He's like, more power to you. He goes, so, and she's like, yeah, well, and she sits there for a second, and it's a great interaction right there.
I've seen that.
But I think the most important line probably from that was when she paused, and then she said, hold on, I'm still trying to work that out.
Doesn't he go, gotcha, or something like that?
He does say gotcha, but that's the scary thing right now, is that we're dealing with, is that people aren't being required to work it out mentally because they're only given one side of the road. And there's a quote, or Anthony Sutton, a famous author, back in the day. He's dead now, but he said the purpose of education is to develop the student, not develop a state machine. And I think that is sort of where we've not where we are, but where we've been for a while. How do you encourage people on the left, right, center to work it out mentally, and the benefits of that?
Well, just the entire topic makes me think of the fact that the left often claims and seizes the moral high ground. And when you think of an argument with the left, and just with any way that they frame a debate, we usually say something like, well, according to the data, you're wrong. And then they say something like, you're evil. You want to deny basic human rights for XYZ. And that's the thing, is we say you're wrong, they follow back with you're evil. And so how do you debate somebody in a situation like that? And we've gotten to this point now. I mean, it's really gotten worse over the last year, and it just gets worse every year, to be honest. But if you think about politics 10 years ago, it's just crazy how things have changed in America. And I think that's because the left is playing a very dirty game of claiming the moral high ground, calling their opponents racist, sexist, misogynist. I'm a woman, and I get called sexist almost every day just for wanting a capitalist society. God forbid. And
Yeah.
so it's just, none of their arguments make sense, but they are so quick to throw really serious accusations at people that are not in any way racist or sexist or homophobic. Any of those things. They're very serious words to call somebody, serious accusations to make about somebody, and they throw it around like it's candy. And so the problem with that is, now when you tell an entire generation, the entire electorate, that, hey, Donald Trump is a racist, he's a misogynist, he hates gay people, he hates everybody, and he's going to ruin your life, he is not a good man, he's a Nazi. Well, when he wins in 2016, no wonder college students need cry rooms. No wonder they need their homework canceled for the next 2 weeks. No wonder classes are canceled and tests are canceled to help people get through, because they really do believe that a Nazi, a racist, a bigot was just elected to the White House. Mm-hmm. So that kind of divisive language, which, might help you out in an election or so, it really does do us very, very wrong in the long run. And that's what's so depressing for me, is how do you undo that? And so I think about it all the time. I think about how we can bridge this gap, but I don't think it stops until people stop with the political cheap tax. I just don't think it is, because we're going to keep having innocent voters who see the news and go, oh my God, we just elected a Nazi to the White House. And
Yeah.
that's where we're at right now. So people have to be careful with the words and the accusations that they throw around.
So somebody asked a second ago about what we think about the mask laws. It's funny. So I was at the gym the other day, and there was a guy that I run into every once in a while, really nice guy. And so we just got into a conversation, and here in at least in Texas, they're like, you got to wear a mask if you go inside a place. And so I've got a little message on my mask.
Oh, what's your message?
So this is tyranny, So I was like, so my brother gave me the idea. He was like, this is stupid. And I'm like, that's a good idea. If I'm going to wear a mask, I'm going to put a message on there. So I mean, I was telling the guy, I said, look, man, I said, the mask thing, I said, wear the mask, don't wear the mask. I said, but what's irritating is that the government is pretending like we're 5 years old. We
Yep.
don't understand, how to take care of ourselves. And I actually wrote an article about that, I think about 2 months ago for the Epic Times, regarding just our surrender of common sense and common decency. And I went through everything. And the way I feel about the mask laws, and just to answer the person's question, is you should be allowed to make the decision on your own whether you want to wear that mask or not, whether you believe that this is, that's going to protect you or not. That's fine. And obviously there's the ongoing debate of, the numbers say this, the statistics say this, the medical community says that. But it comes down to the government telling you exactly what to do in your daily life. And there's this counter argument, because my mom brought it up because somebody brought it up to her. And she's like, well, what about seatbelts? And I'm like, what about seatbelts? I said, shouldn't be a law for seatbelts either. I said, because one, you get to, it's you that you're protecting. It's not, you're not affecting, someone else. You get to make that decision on your own. I was like, the seatbelt laws should be like anything, along those lines. It should be optional to where you make that decision on your own, because as American citizens, and here's what I think it really has to go back to. With everything that we're talking about tonight, it needs to go back to the foundation. And that's the scary thing, is that there are a lot of people who don't have a foundation. It's based strictly on the pathos, just on the emotional structure of the argument. There is no history involved. There's no, why was this country, founded, and what was it founded on? And the primary thing is self-government. So that is my view on the mask laws. I don't think that there should be laws or the threat of fines or imprisonment for something so. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, for me, I don't think there should be restrictions or punishment in terms of when you go out in public, you must wear a mask. But I do think, if you want to be a private business and you want to require people to wear masks, fine, good. What I would prefer is that we can say to government, listen, we can handle this. Us as small businesses, we are flexible, we're nimble, we're creative, and this is where we can really shine and show that we can take care of our community by just saying, like, hey, if you could do X, Y, Z, it would really help us by slowing the spread. That's what this is all about. We can show that we're responsible. We don't need to be told little baby steps along the way and treated like we're 5 years old. What hurts the most, I would say, is, I mean, especially in New York, it just hurts. Like, my entire life has been really put into pause, and nothing's the same, and your business model is now different. You've had to adjust. All my friends have had to adjust. My dad was deployed in the military. Everybody's going through things, and then to see online that politicians who once were saying, don't wear a mask, don't be stupid, you don't need a mask, blah blah blah, they're now acting like we are again the grandma killers for not wearing masks. So I just wish that they could just practice a little humility and understand that things are changing day to day, week to week, month to month, and to act like you are perfect in your response for coronavirus is just pathetic. And it's frustrating for us to see as we are going through our daily lives that have now changed because of everything that's happened. And so just stop. Practice some humility. Cuomo, to all the people who acted like we didn't have to wear masks, made fun of us, made fun of the people for wearing masks. I don't know if you remember those sassy tweets from all those national politicians saying, don't wear masks. They need to be saved for the healthcare workers. They don't do anything. To now see them say that, oh, we have to wear them. It's a must. It should be a national mandate. It's embarrassing on their part. And so it's just really frustrating. But from that lens of just COVID restrictions, like I said, I think we need to show that as individuals, we can take care of ourselves and our communities on our own with responsible decision making, whether that's the social distancing or the 6 feet apart thing, whatever. But it scares me to know that now government does have this kind of power over us. I think specifically of a woman in, I think it was in Oregon. She had her state opening up in 1 week. She could have opened up her hairstyle salon in 1 week, but she did it a week early, saying, I need to pay the bills. Okay, I can't wait any longer. My stylist can't wait any longer. We have food that we need to put on the table for our kids. It's just time we have to do it. She opened 1 week early. She was fined thousands of dollars and then hit with another thousands and thousands of dollars in fines. And then on top of that, Child Protective Services was sent to her house for opening 1 week early. Child Protective Services. And they questioned her child, her young child, who's like 7 years old, all alone in a room. They questioned her husband. And then even worse, they said, what else? There isn't a rule or a law that we can really do to punish her, but what else can we do to really make her hurt right now? What they did is they had the city come in and say, your property's on our land, and you're not working with the state right now for their requirements, so we're going to say you're in violation of your agreement for the land and the property on the land. So you see how you're in violation right now. They don't have something in writing. They don't have a specific thing a rule that you have broken, but they will use every tentacle of big government and bureaucracy to hold you down and to hold you accountable. And that is just really freaky to me and really scary. So that's what I worry more about. I think the mask thing is important to talk about a little bit, but it's just more of that overarching feel of government where they don't even have a rule that they can hold you accountable for, but they will find a way to punish you.
Right. Yeah, I think that is I think the overarching issue. It's it comes down to is like, look, it's not about the mask. It's not about the mask. What it is about government overreach and government power. Like that's what it is. And this is sort of government overreach and supercharge, to where you're realizing all of a sudden on a whim, a mayor or a governor could put an edict out, and now the issue at hand with that is that you create criminals. The more laws that you put in place, I wish people understood that. It's like the more laws that you put in place, the more criminals you create. I think, and I've written about this before. I think we've put more than 2 million pages on the Federal Registry in the past 30 years, I believe. And they've tried a couple of times just to figure out how many criminal laws we have on the books. They can't find. Even Neil Gorsuch, he tried to start something, and they told him, like, look, we already tried this in the 90s, and we couldn't do it. And that's 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
So that the more laws that you have, the more criminals you make, and that's what's happening right now. Is you see people, pastors, getting arrested. I wrote an article for the Epic Times the other day, just sort of going at the pastors and organizations, church organizations, of saying, you've totally surrendered your First Amendment right, and now when pastors are being thrown into jail and fined, and it's the same thing that was happening in China before it happened here, and you're not even saying anything. So that's another conversation altogether. I want to talk about the creep of socialism to communism, and I think it starts with democracy. So people are like, wait a minute. Democracy, like, what does that have to do with anything? Democracy was a pure democracy is what the founding fathers did not want to have, and you can check out last week's episode, last Thursday, where I talk about that. I give a lot of stuff from the Federalist Papers, and also stuff where Socrates goes nuts on democracy, a pure democracy, the problem with it. But here's some of the things that has happened here in the U.S. And one is public education. Public education is something that we've been doing for 100 plus years now. We've had the mass breakup of families where 50% overall is more or less, single parent homes. I don't want to lose you. I know it's late at night. Mom is about to fall asleep.
I know, I'm trying not to yawn, but I'm like,
no, just yawn. I don't want you dying on me.
I'm sorry, I'm not cool.
No, it's cool that you're not cool. But I wanted
Thanks.
to just hit these and get your thoughts on, and then we'll close out. But you've got this free love mentality where you can have sex with anybody you want, and that's encouraged.
Woo! Just kidding.
I know, right? Yeah. Graduated income tax, and that's obviously has been going on here since really the 1860s. Since the Civil War, it has continued to get worse and worse and worse. We have a national bank now with the Federal Reserve, signed in 1913. And then you have a movement of anti-religion. All of these things have been happening here in the U.S., and all of them are written down by Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto. How far, do you think a lot of people realize the creep towards communism or at least socialism that this country has done, not just during the past few years?
No, so I have a really important thing that I think we all need to start considering. People who are more active in the freedom movement. Listen, I was not a smarty about socialism or communism or any of this stuff. I was not well read or anything. I just really cared about the country, and I thought that telling these stories would be cool. But over the last 2 years, I read every night, every morning, and I take the book notes and I try and connect the dots. I will admit, things in our country, all the things that you listed, it just seems like a normal part of our life, of our day to day, of our government. people now, we can't imagine a situation where we don't have those things, where we don't have the Fed, where we don't have the IRS, where we don't have a personal income tax. Can you imagine that? It just seems so ingrained in what we have now. People really have to do a lot of digging into books. And what's crazy is the men and the women who wrote these amazing pieces of work, they did all this work, they made all these beautiful points, and now they're just hidden in books that aren't read anymore. And so that's a whole other like tragedy. But what really encourages me is that the more I learn and read about this, I go, there is hope for really great change in the future, because we have gone quite down the rabbit hole towards a socialist future. And so I always consider, as I'm reading, I'm like, how can we turn this lesson into more digestible content that can be put online or that can be put on social media? And so that's what I do see a future in doing that. But I will just say, it's hard because so many average Americans we're just hanging out, you know? Life is pretty great in America, and we don't realize that because the government has all this power right now, it's not how it has to be. We don't have a vision of a more free opportunity, because it seems pretty free right now. It doesn't seem like there's a threat. And what I will say is, one of the issues right now is people say, oh, well, socialism is different because it'll just be democratic socialism. It's not a socialist dictatorship. It's not like Cuba and the USSR and Venezuela and all the other failures. And it's definitely not communism, Morgan. And so what they also say is they call it community owned, you know, communal businesses, stuff like that. Oh my God, don't get me started
Yep.
on that, because the issue with that
Well, I
is
mean,
socialism. What?
Marx referenced it as a openly legalized community of women. I mean, hello.
Woo! Okay, but love that. But then again, that's the distortion of language, where it's like, "Ooh, openly organized community sounds
It's
cool to me. What is
organized.
that?" You
Yeah.
know. But again, it's what I think about is, in the entire grand scheme of things, socialism looks awesome on paper to some, like to most people. They're like, they read it and they're like, "Sweet, okay, let's make it happen." The problem is that it's just an idea, and when you implement socialism, and this is why it frustrates me, they say it's never been tried right before. If socialism was tried correctly, it would be awesome. It would be a utopia. If communism was implemented correctly, if it was done right, it would work finally. It's just never been done correctly. The problem is, you follow the steps that were written on the paper, and when you do those steps that were written on the paper, the result isn't what's written on the paper as what the result would be. The result ends up turning a democracy where maybe you did elect a socialist person who, you know, was elected in a proper way through an election into office. Maybe you did democratically elect that person, but that person starts to implement the socialist plan. They start to implement socialist policies, seize the means of production, take government control over private business and industry. They start to do that, and what do you know? That it doesn't follow the plan on the paper. It starts to take its natural course of people gaining so much power over the people in that government that it turns from a socialist democracy into a socialist dictatorship. Once you're in a dictatorship, it's quite easy to turn into a communist dictatorship, where you start controlling not just the economy, not just the business, not just industry, but you are able to control every aspect of the people in the country's life. And so that's the natural progression from democracy, or even a republic like America, it could happen here, into a socialist dictatorship, into a communist dictatorship. It doesn't work out the way it's written on paper. And so for them to act like it just never has fully been implemented properly, no, it's just when you try and implement it, it fails. That's the problem here. It's not going to change. And so that's what really worries me. And people in Venezuela, when I go back to these testimonies, they talk about how, with this one really great story of Gabby Franco. She's from Venezuela. She was an Olympic shooter on the firearm team in Venezuela, and she had a coach who has escaped Cuba, and he escaped Fidel Castro. And so he escaped Castro's Cuba to go to Venezuela. And he started telling his team 20 years ago, he said, you know, I'm getting a little worried by what's happening right now with this Chavez guy. This Chavez guy is like saying the same stuff as Castro. He sounds quite familiar as Castro, and that didn't work out very well. And then it started to get harder and harder to buy guns, and it started to seem more and more like Cuba. And next thing you know, people on the team and all of his friends, they would all say, "Oh my gosh, we're not like Cuba though. We're not an island. We're so rich. We're the richest democracy in Latin America. It can never happen here in Venezuela." They all laughed. And so now Gabby, in her video for us, she said, I cannot believe that I am now in my coach's shoes in America saying the same thing to Americans who think that it could never happen here. We thought the same thing. Nobody is immune from this disease of socialism. Nobody is immune. And so for her to say that, it was just really powerful. And it just shows we aren't exceptional in any way other than the fact that we did have really great founding documents and founding principles. But if we abandon them, nothing makes us special, and we are not especially immune from falling for socialism and communism the way any other country has in the past.
Yeah, beautifully said. I think a lot of people get lost in intent over outcome. And so you can say whatever it is that you want to in a very, very nice way and promising way, but it needs to be outcome over intent. And so that's where history comes into play. Last question, and we're calling it a night.
Okay.
How do you avoid being politically combative whenever you're having these conversations with people?
Well, that's a really great question. And one of the most important things to remember is if you're trying to actually change someone's heart and mind, you have to look at the research. You have to figure out what the best way to communicate with someone is. It's not arguing in a debate. I love debates. Don't get me wrong. I love if somebody wants to literally debate an argument or get a little political. I love that sometimes. But if you're trying to actually change someone's mind, what really is effective is peer-to-peer communication. A lot of studies show that. They show that it can come from family or from friends. And so keeping it very casual and friendly and peer-to-peer style, not trying to talk down to them, you're not trying to lecture them, instead you're really just trying to get on their level. That's the studies are showing that that's the most effective way, not only in politics but just in any situation, to get somebody to open their mind to a new idea or a new concept. And so I'm taking that into the political world, into the fight against socialism, and that's why we really do try and do a lot of young people who have escaped socialism and communism. We have a lot of young people just in America who want to talk to their peers about their ideas to solve the student loan crisis or finding affordable health care or protecting the environment with more conservative or just more freedom oriented ideas. And that's something I know you mentioned earlier. We need to talk more about results and not just intent. What I really think we have to focus on as well as conservatives in terms of winning over people in the future is results oriented messaging. And Milton Friedman, I guess, has also spoken about this. I just kind of thought about, we should probably do this. I was in the shower when I was thinking of it, but apparently people have already been talking about it, so I'm not trying to steal any ideas here. But I just think it would be interesting when you consider how the left talks about healthcare, for example. They say everybody has a human right, a basic human right to healthcare. And what if we said, okay, well, we also believe that everybody deserves access to affordable and quality healthcare, and we think that XYZ, competition and flexibility in plans and yada yada, but transparency in pricing, we think that those things will provide people of all backgrounds access and affordability and quality health, or access to affordable quality health care. And so I think the more we talk about that and what our ideas and what our values would bring to the people, I think we'll be in a really great position for the future, and focusing more on the results of the ideas that we have. Because conservatives are hard with messaging. We really struggle with emotion, and we struggle with having that peer-to-peer style, and the left is so good at it, and instead we just kind of reference statistics and reference our white papers. And so I think that might be a great step for us moving forward.
There you go. All right. So where can people find your videos and everything that you've interviewed people on?
Thank you. Well, we have Young Americans Against Socialism on all forms of social media except for TikTok. We don't have a Commie China TikTok account.
There you go.
But our website where you can join us, it's fightsocialism.org. We're kind of like in a launching phase right now. We have a new contributing writers program and a new coalition that you can join for like social media rapid response. If you just kind of want to join in with us and figure out how you can get more involved, the coalition's the way to go. We also have an internship program, and if anybody you know, or if you have lived through socialism or communism and you want to do a hardcore testimony with us, you can also fill out the form there. So there's plenty of ways at fightsocialism.org to get involved with us, and we would really love if you could reach us there. So thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad you were able to make it. Always a good conversation with you. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Morgan Zegers of Young Americans Against Socialism. You're doing a great job. And like a lot of people in here are saying, thank you very much. One of our fans was like, you're giving this baby boomer hope. So that was good.
My comments have actually frozen, so I haven't seen any of those. I'm quite sad. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. And you guys can connect with me as well and send me any questions you have. Thank you again. And I hope everyone has a good night.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good night. Go to sleep. Have a good night's sleep.
I will.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you enjoyed the show with Morgan Zegers of Young Americans Against Socialism. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Good conversation. And yes, A. Stein, 1989. Yeah, we all need to be reading Friedman in the shower a lot more often. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hope you had a wonderful time. You can go check out our Instagram page. And also, if you don't listen to our weekly podcast, you can check us out, The Sons of History. And we're on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, all those places. Thank you very much for joining in. Thank you for all your comments. Y'all are awesome. Y'all have a great night. Now that was a really good conversation, even if I have to say so myself. Now, if you could do us a favor and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you don't mind, like and comment on this video. While you're doing that, I'm going to wait for Thomas Jefferson to make his next move. You always win that staring contest. It's your move! Go! Okay. You seeing this? Are you watching this?